Hey, fourth graders, just wanted to talk with you today about our science lesson. And we're going to start by reading at page D18 in your ecosystems textbook. And we are going to read and take some notes on the note page that you see here in front of you on my screen. Before we start reading, I just wanted to take a look and see what are the things we're going to be taking notes about. You can see that this section of the book is about feeding an ecosystem. We're going to take notes about what are producers and consumers. Consumers can be herbivores, carnivores, or omnivores. And then we're also going to take notes about what decomposers are. Then you can see in the next section, we're going to read about and take notes on predator and prey and the predator-prey relationship. And from there, we're going to learn about something called symbiosis. There are three different types of symbiosis. There's the first one is parasitism, and the second one is called commensalism, and the third is called mutualism. So we'll be taking notes on those today. Let me scroll back up here and we'll get started. And we're going to start on page D18, which is titled What's to Eat. I want you to read along with me as I read to you. And what you'll notice that's interesting about page D18 is that the column on the right actually starts higher than the column on the left. But we know that as we read from left to right. So we'll start underneath the picture of the owl with the paragraph that is lower on the page. So we'll start reading now. Remember, we're looking for the word producers first in our notes because that's where my cursor is flashing and that tells me that that's where I need to make my first important note. It is mid-autumn and the sun is setting in the forest. A gray squirrel scuttles around the base of a sycamore tree, searching for food. Few acorns remain on the forest floor, so the squirrel ventures into a nearby clearing to nibble on fallen berries. High above, a great horned owl perches on the branch of a red oak tree. The owl has begun its nightly search for prey. It hears the squirrel scurrying in the clearing and focuses its eyes in preparation for attack. The owl spreads its wings and in one swift, silent swoop seizes the squirrel in its powerful talons. Mrs. Peters ought to like that part. Everyone needs food. Great horned owls thrive in forest ecosystems where they find plenty of small mammals to feed on. In all ecosystems, each organism has its own way of getting food energy. Some organisms can use the sun for food because they carry on photosynthesis. These organisms are called producers. In forest ecosystems, producers include trees, vines, low-growing shrubs, ferns, and mosses. So let's take a look at what are producers. We know that producers make a product, right? We've talked about that. So I'm going to add that in my notes. And you should be too. And then in the text, I read that they are producers because they carry on photosynthesis. The text also gave some examples, trees, vines, ferns, and mosses. So I'm going to add those to my notes as well. Actually, I'm going to write the word example first. I think that's enough notes about producers. Let's go on and read about consumers on page D19. Organisms that obtain energy by eating other organisms are called producers. I'm sorry, scratch that. They're called consumers. Let's copy that sentence into our notes. So consumers are organisms that obtain that obtain energy by eating other organisms. So, organisms that obtain energy by eating other organisms are called consumers. To get energy, consumers must eat producers or other consumers. So that's interesting. Maybe I should add that to my notes. I think you should too. They eat, sorry, my mouse keeps acting funny. Producers or other consumers. Picking up where I left off, both owls and squirrels are consumers in a forest ecosystem. Squirrels eat acorns, fruit, berries, tree sap, and more than 100 kinds of plants. Owls eat squirrels, many other mammals, and sometimes insects. Another kind of consumer, called a decomposer, feeds on the waste of living organisms and on dead, decaying organisms such as rotting plants, dead trees, and animals. So I'm looking down and I'm seeing the examples of consumers, but let's go down and take our notes about decomposers since that popped up in our text. So we see that decomposers, I'm rereading from the first sentence, feeds on the waste of living organisms and on dead, decaying organisms. So decomposers, let's go down here, feed on the waste of organisms, or it says, reading back from the text, dead, decaying organisms. I'd like to add in yuck. Okay, so decomposers either feed on waste of organisms or dead or decaying organisms. Back to the text. Fungi, bacteria, and worms are forest decomposers that release nutrients from animal waste and decaying matter and return those nutrients to the soil. I think that's an important thing to note too, that although decomposers do a really gross job, they are what return the nutrients from that decaying matter to the soil. I'm going to go ahead and add that to my notes. So let's go on and read about the three kinds of consumers. Remember, we're reading about herbivores, carnivores, and omnivores. Consumers can be classified by the kinds of food they eat. Plant-eating consumers are called herbivores. Meat-eating consumers are called carnivores. Consumers that eat both plants and animals are known as omnivores. So I'm going to go ahead and make notes of that. The text said that herbivores are plant eaters. Carnivores are meat eaters. And omnivores eat both plants and meat. Going back to the text, it says squirrels, deer, rabbits, mice, and most insects are examples of forest herbivores. Carnivores feed on herbivores and other carnivores. Let's see. In the activity on page D14, you probably saw that owl pellets contain fur, bones, and other animal remains that owls cannot digest. You might be surprised to know that some owls can capture mammals as large as cats, rabbits, and skunks. So, boys and girls, although we did not do the owl pellet on page D14, hopefully we will be able to soon. Just know that when an owl cannot digest things in its stomach, they actually are regurgitated, that means like thrown up, as owl pellets. And you can see from the owl pellets what the owl has eaten. Back to the text. Omnivores can eat either plants or animals. They often eat whatever is available. The forest-dwelling box turtle, for example, eats strawberries, blackberries, and mushrooms. It also eats insects and spiders. Other common omnivores include woodpeckers and tree creepers. Other ecosystems contain different organisms, but all ecosystems contain producers, consumers, and decomposers. I'm going to go ahead and take a moment to pause for a second before we go on in the text and read the next 3 pages. I wanted to make sure that you have in your notes what I have in my notes, because when we move on, I'm going to need to move that from the screen. So we're going to learn a little bit about the predator-prey relationship on page D20. If you turn the page, you can see that this section of the text is called Eat or Be Eaten. So I'm going to go ahead and start reading, and I just want to point out to you that we are reading for the word predator, prey, and we're reading about the predator-prey relationship. The cycle of organisms eating and being eaten is a major part of life in an ecosystem. Every consumer has to eat in order to live. An organism that hunts and eats other organisms is called a predator. An organism that is hunted and is eaten is called the prey. So let's go ahead and add that to our notes, that a predator is an organism that hunts and eats other organisms. And we learned that prey is the organism that is hunted and eaten. So moving on in the text, it says the interaction between predator and prey is called the predator-prey relationship. Predator-prey relationships occur between animals and other animals, or between microscopic animals like protists and other protists. So let's read a little bit about the lynx and the hare. In the evergreen forests of North America, the lynx and hare have a predator-prey relationship. The lynx feeds on the hare. The lynx population increases when hares are abundant. Abundant simply means plentiful, there are lots of them. And decreases when hares are scarce. Scarce means that there are not very many of them. The graph below shows the relationship between the lynx and hare populations over a period of time. So if you scan your eyes to the graph below, you can see that the blue line represents the number of hares, which is a type of rabbit, and the number of lynx, which is a type of big cat. The hare is represented in a blue color, and the lynx is represented in a pink color. And you can see that as the population of hares increases, the population of lynx typically increases as well. Back to the text. Similar relationships take place between plants and animals. Elephants eat so many plants in an area that the environment no longer contains enough food. The elephants move on, allowing the plants in the environment to recover. So looking back at the term predator-prey relationship in our notes, let's just add for now that the interaction between a predator and prey is called a predator-prey relationship. And it can occur between animals and other animals, or between microscopic animals. And as I'm typing this, I'm thinking, I added large and microscopic here, but what I'm thinking is that maybe I should change that and make it say between large and microscopic animals and other animals. I'm going to go ahead and move that. So So we've got between large and microscopic animals and other animals. So we're moving on in our text to the section called For Better or For Worse. That's the heading of the section. And we're going to take notes about the 3 different types of symbiosis. Predator-prey relationships are only one kind of interaction between organisms in an ecosystem. Some species form long-term close relationships with other species. This kind of relationship is called symbiosis. So, boys and girls, although it's not in our notes, please recognize that the text says that some species form long, close relationships with other species. That's what we call symbiosis. So I'm going back to the text and I'm reading, symbiosis can occur between plants and microscopic organisms, animals and microscopic organisms, animals and plants, and animals and other plants. The 3 kinds of symbiosis are explained below. As I'm reading, I'm thinking about what's going on in your minds, and I'm thinking about what your understanding is of microscopic organisms. Just note the word microscope and microscopic, and recognize that microscopic organisms are ones that can only be seen through a microscope. They're very, 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 very tiny. So we're reading, ouch, that hurts. In parasitism, one organism lives off of, feeds upon, and harms another organism. An organism that feeds on other organisms is called a parasite. The organisms that are fed upon are called hosts. So I'm going to go ahead and add that in my notes. And in parentheses here, I'm going to type the word negative because parasitism is not a positive relationship between organisms. So then in my notes, I'm going to go ahead and put in that an organism that feeds on another organism is called a parasite. Organisms that are fed upon are called hosts. So, ladies and gents, just giving you a chance to make sure that you have that in your notes, that in parasitism, a parasite is the organism that feeds upon another organism, and the host is the organism that's fed upon. Going back to the text, a familiar example of parasitism is the relationship between a dog, the host, and fleas and ticks, parasites. Fleas and ticks live and feed upon dogs and other animals. The fleas and ticks benefit, and the dogs are harmed and irritated. Parasites harm their hosts, but they rarely cause them to die. Death of the host would lead to death of the parasite. The parasite would eventually have nothing to feed upon. Moving on to no harm done, and scrolling down on my screen, we're going to read about commensalism. In commensalism, one species benefits while the other species seems to be unaffected. Many animals have such relationships with plants. So let's go ahead and stop and note that in commensalism, one species benefits. So although it's not a relationship where both benefit, at least one does. So we're going to note that this is a positive interaction between organisms. And let's go on and read a little bit about commensalism. Many animals have such relationships with plants. The animals resemble a certain part of a plant and thus can hide from predators. For example, some crab spiders resemble flower petals. The spider sits in flowers, hidden from, turning the page, the view of pollinating insects. When an insect lands on a flower, the insect is quickly eaten by the spider. While the spider profits, the flower is not benefited or harmed, although the flower's pollen is not being spread at that moment. On the African savanna, the routine of the wildebeest greatly benefits the egret. As the wildebeest grazes, its sharp hooves loosen the soil. Hungry egrets walk eagerly behind the wildebeest. Feasting on the insects stirred up from the ground. The wildebeest, of course, is completely unaffected by the actions of the egrets. So you can see up above in the pictures, you can see the crab spider illustration. Let's see if you can find that in the picture. And then in the middle picture, you can see the wildebeest and the egrets. So let's make a note about commensalism, that in commensalism, one organism benefits and the other one is unharmed and unaffected. If there are other things that I'm reading that you want to take notes of here, like you want to write down the example about the spider or the egrets and wildebeest, that's fine. You can add that. Tomorrow when you come to class, we'll actually draw the examples. So you do not need to draw the examples of the 3 types of symbiosis now. So now we're going to go on and read about mutualism. The closest relationship of all is mutualism, in which all species take part benefit. Probably the most familiar example of mutualism is the pollination of flowers by bees. Bees and certain small birds, such as hummingbirds, drink nectar from flowers, and in the process carry away pollen to pollinate other flowers. The bees benefit by getting food, and the flowers benefit by being pollinated. Some forms of mutualism are so close that 2 species become physically linked together. Lichens, which look like colored patches on rocks and trees, are separate organisms, fungi and algae, that live together. The algae produces sugars that the fungi can use, and the fungi supply the algae with nutrients and water. So you can see the picture of lichens up above, the lichens and algae. The lichens, which are fungi and algae working together. So in mutualism, that's obviously a positive relationship because both parties benefit. So I'm going to go ahead and add that to my notes. So I'm going to do both organisms benefit in the relationship. So ladies and gents, this concludes my part of the video. We're going to stop taking notes for now. Just remember that tomorrow in your note packets you're going to be doing your drawing example of the 3 types of symbiosis. You can either draw an example from your reading or our reading today, or you can draw an example that you think of on your own. And then when I let you go, Mrs. Peters is going to work with you on an activity from your textbook, which is, it is on pages 26 and 27. You're going to be doing an activity about how energy flows in an ecosystem. I hope that you're having a great day, boys and girls, and I will plan on seeing you on Thursday for science and on Wednesday for class. See you soon.